You don't get to the top without making a few enemies, and Ric Flair, across his illustrious decades-long professional wrestling career, has made more than his share of those. Celebrated in some circles as the very best to ever do it, Flair is equally criticised in others for his polarising in-ring style, questionable business dealings, and other exploits. So let's take a look at this beef-having, heat-seeking, grudge-holding, confrontation-causing son of a gun. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 wrestlers who had heat with Ric Flair. Woo! Number 10, Rick Rude. Despite both men being great workers, the matches between Rick Rude and Ric Flair in WCW in the early 1990s were always frustratingly disappointing affairs. That could have been because both men were natural heels, or it could have been because Ravishing Rick and Slick Rick did not get along. Rude was generally frustrated about his position in WCW as he wanted to be the top guy and was never pushed as such. He seemingly laid much of the blame at Flair, who was on the booking committee for his place on the card. According to Flair, Rude became increasingly confrontational during his final months in the promotion, leading to a tense situation between the two backstage at the 1994 Slamboree pay-per-view. Rude was supposed to vacate the WCW International title after suffering what would turn out to be a career-ending back injury while defending the belt against Sting in Japan several weeks later. However, Rude didn't like the creative presented to him by Flair and walked out of the arena after threatening to kill him. Rumor and innuendo suggest that the Flair-Rude issue may have been exacerbated by Rude making a pass at Flair's future ex-wife, Wendy Barlow, aka Fifi the Maid. Number 9, Eric Bischoff. Flair and Eric Bischoff reportedly started having issues after Eazy-E gained significant power within WCW. Despite being one of the company's biggest stars, Rick never felt Eric gave him his due respect, especially when being compared to stars who came over to WCW from the WWF like Roddy Piper, Randy Savage, and Hulk Hogan. Their issues escalated when Flair missed an April 9, 1998 Thunder taping in order to accompany his young son Reed to an amateur wrestling tournament. Bischoff, in response, threatened to sue Flair into bankruptcy. It never quite got there, but a lawsuit was filed, costing the Nature Boy about $200,000 in legal fees before he returned to WCW in September of '98. He and Bischoff then worked an on-screen program based on their real-life animosity, but the heat hadn't fully diffused. It ended up bubbling over years later when both men were working for WWE, when prior to the March 17, 2003 Raw taping, Flair confronted Bischoff backstage and the two had a physical altercation. They buried the hatchet and worked together for years after, even becoming friends at one point, but in recent times they've gone back to being at odds over one thing or another. Number 8, Mick Foley. They say the pen is mightier than the sword, whoever they are, but is the knife-edged chop mightier than the barbed wire baseball bat? The beef between Flair and Foley stems from the shots the two men took at one another in their respective autobiographies. In Mick's first book, he claimed that Flair was every bit as bad on the booking side of things as he was great on the wrestling side, while suggesting that Rick had held him down during his early 90s run in WCW. Flair, in response, branded Foley a glorified stuntman and likened his talent level to that of the Ultimate Warrior or Brutus Beefcake. The dirtiest player in the game doubled down on his comments in interviews promoting his book, while Foley took shots at Flair in a promo he gave in Ring of Honor. When the two men ran into each other backstage at the December 13, 2004 Raw taping, things turned physical. According to reports, Flair threw a punch at Foley, who declined to fight the then 55-year-old as the two continued to bicker. They wound up working a program together in 2006 and later hashed out their differences and became friends while sat next to each other on a plane. Number 7, Becky Lynch and Seth Rollins. While feuding with Charlotte Flair in 2018, the red-hot Becky Lynch branded herself the Man, launching a nickname that would sell a gazillion t-shirts. The trouble was, Ric Flair claimed ownership of the phrase. Having already trademarked "to be the man you gotta beat the man," Flair filed to trademark "the Man" itself in September of 2019. This caused issues not just between Flair and Lynch, but Rick and his own daughter, as well as Rick and the company. From the Nature Boy's perspective, he was just trying to look after his own interests and claimed that he had attempted to reach an amicable agreement with WWE over the phrase. The dispute was eventually settled, but bad blood between Flair and Lynch lingered, with the two taking shots at each other via social media and on podcasts. The man's man, Seth Rollins, got dragged into things when Flair called him out for ignoring him during an autograph session. decision. Though Ric said that he wasn't mad at Rollins for taking his wife's side and praised his in-ring talents, he still took the snub as a sign of disrespect. Anyway, Flair made peace with Becky and Seth backstage at Raw 30. Number 6. Shane Douglas. Growing up, a young Shane Douglas idolized Ric Flair and was thrilled when he got to work with his in-ring hero in WCW. The dynamic dude soon found out firsthand that it's sometimes best to never meet your heroes and left WCW with a much lesser opinion of Flair. Douglas believed that Ric used his influence in WCW to hold him and other young up-and-comers down, but worse was the after-hours behavior that he claims to have witnessed, including Flair getting naked and acting inappropriately in front of women and children. After leaving WCW, the franchise would continually trash Dick Flair in promos during his run in ECW, despite the fact that Ric worked for another organization. When Douglas rejoined WCW later in the decade, he and Flair cleared the air somewhat and worked a program together, but Douglas has continued to deride his former idol's character in interviews ever since, to the point that it's become one of the things he's most well known for. Number 5. Bret Hart. Both Ric Flair and Bret Hart are on the shortlist for greatest of all time. Though both may be in the discussion when it comes to the GOAT, they had surprisingly low opinions of each other at one point in time. Hart initially soured on Flair after beating the Nature Boy for his first WWF title at a house show in 1992, feeling that Flair's performance was lackluster and dampened his big moments. He also complained of Flair wrestling in a predictable routine fashion during house show rematches and hated taking Flair's chops. Flair took exception to these criticisms and naturally fired back. He accused Bret himself of being repetitive and questioned his drawing ability while saying that he was a legend in his own mind but nowhere near as good as he thought he was. This went on for years until the two legends sorted it out and are considered good friends today. Number 4. Ole Anderson. The Four Horsemen were thick as thieves in the ring, but it was often a different story behind the curtain. Various IRL feuds have transpired within the legendary faction, with the one between Flair and Ole Anderson standing as one of the most notable. Well, much like Bret Hart, Anderson felt as though Flair had the same basic match every night and did stupid stuff within it. When he was booking the Mid-Atlantic territory during the early 1980s, Ole actually suggested to make Flair NWA World's Heavyweight Champion specifically so that he would have to travel around the world and thus wouldn't have the same match in his own promotion every night. Beyond that, Ole just didn't really get on with Flair as a person, complaining about his lavish lifestyle and the fact that he always seemed to be hard up even though he made big money as a top star. Anderson regularly trashed Flair in interviews he gave after retiring, but Flair still said that he was grateful to Ole when he passed away in 2024. Number 3. Scott Steiner. In the main event of the 14th Clash of the Champions TV special, Ric Flair's WCW World title defense against Scott Steiner went to a time limit draw. The match was a disappointment considering the talent of both men, and Steiner blamed Flair for purposely tanking it by sandbagging his offense and cutting him off at inopportune times. The big bad booty daddy carried the grudge around with him and made it very public knowledge when he blasted Flair in an unscripted shoot promo on the February 7th, 2000 edition of Nitro, accusing him of ripping off the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, conspiring to get Steve Austin fired, and referring to him as a jealous old bastard. When Steiner learned of his suspension, 2 weeks with paymind at the following Thunder taping, he attempted to attack Flair in the arena parking lot. Since then, Big Papa Pump has been unabashed when giving his uncensored thoughts about Flair, even if the two worked amicably both in WWE and in TNA. Number 2. Triple H. Nope, even Flair's closest friends and confidants are not exempt when it comes to falling out with him. Triple H was another wrestler who idolized Ric Flair growing up and jumped at the chance to work with him when Flair rejoined WWE in 2001. It was the Game who included Flair in his Evolution stable, with Ric crediting his then best pal for helping him regain the confidence he had lost during the dismal dying days of WCW. However, when Flair was at odds with WWE over the Man trademark in 2019, Paul Levesque got caught in the crosshairs. Details remain sketchy, but Flair admitted that the two of them had had a big falling out over the issue and were not on good terms for several years because of it. Things changed after Triple H had a serious health scare in 2021. On his podcast, Flair noted that it, plus his own near-death experience years prior, had softened his stance and the two men had made nice when Ric was backstage for Raw's 30th anniversary show. Number 1. Shawn Michaels. It would be hard to write a better ending to a full-time in-ring career than the extended send-off Ric Flair received during WrestleMania 24 weekend. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame on Saturday, had one last great match with Shawn Michaels on Sunday, and got to say farewell in front of his fans while soaking in the adulation of his friends and peers on Monday. While Rick may have been grateful for what Shawn did for him, not to mention the $65,000 Rolex he received as a gift after, that didn't make the Heartbreak Kid immune from his wrath. Flair actually laid into Michaels for comments HBK made about him on an ESPN 30 for 30 special, specifically that Ric Flair doesn't love and never took the time to get to know the real Richard Flair. Flair admonished Michaels in videos posted to social media, asking him who he was to judge his character given Shawn's own murky past. A few weeks later, however, Flair apologized for his comments while noting that he was upset and had gotten excited. "I'm sorry, I still love you."